Yeah.
Hi, thank you for joining us. My name is Marion Michelle. I'm the Executive Director of Breakthrough Birmingham. Been in this role now for 4.5 years, and really excited to be a part of this conversation. Breakthrough Birmingham is one of 24 affiliates of Breakthrough Collaborative, spanning across the entire United States. Joining us for our conversation today is Vince as we talk about reimagining what equitable education might look, reimagining what equitable education might look like in this country. So welcome, Vince.
Thank you, Marion. It's so good to see you. It's good to spend time with you virtually
Yeah.
and our group that has joined us.
I'm really excited to get this conversation started. And so before we even jump into the nitty gritty stuff, why don't you just tell us, if you could summarize in like 10 seconds, who is Vince? What are your bullet points?
Yeah, I would say lifelong educator, 20 years ago, started out as a high school English teacher, committed myself to this field, became an administrator, and now the proud CEO of Breakthrough Collaborative, and the proud father of a 5-year-old who just started kindergarten this year.
Oh, congratulations to her. That's exciting. That's a 12-year journey you just began. So welcome to the public education world. What is drawing you to the work? Where is this commitment coming from? Because it's clear that from what I know about you, education is pretty consistently, clearly um, a happy point for you.
Yeah. I mean, I would say first, I am the first in my family to graduate college. So for me, the benefits that I have received as a result of my college education are quite dramatic, right? And the opportunities that have come my way through access to a quality education, both public and then when I went off to college. So the idea that I had over the course of my K-12 experience, incredible teachers who really helped me see my potential, what was possible for me. Part of that was going to college. I just felt the need that I had to pay it forward in some form or another. The other piece is somewhat personal. My grandmother, she herself did not have the chance or the opportunity to go to college. In fact, Marion, you may not know this, but she was born and raised in Alabama, just outside of Birmingham.
That's
So for
exciting.
her, the idea of her grandson being able to go to college and being able to graduate was really important. And I carry that responsibility with me. And so the idea of being able to connect with and work with students to help them gain access to quality education that ultimately opens doors is what fuels my commitment to this work.
I had no idea what you're getting with that. I mean, I already loved you, Vince, but this we know that Alabama is a state that really holds a special place in my heart. I'm not from Alabama. I'm from Miami, Florida originally, and joining Teach for America is what actually got me into Alabama. And except for a short stint in New York State, in New York City specifically, Alabama is the place where I think we can do a lot of great work. And so to hear that connection is really powerful. Um, Tell me a little bit about what attracted you to your current role now at Breakthrough. What is it about Breakthrough that makes you see like this is the next logical step in your career?
Yeah, I mean, so a couple of thoughts come to mind when I think about what attracted me to Breakthrough. I would say the first is around this time last year, I really started to see the reports about the impact of the pandemic, right? Both on teacher shortages, both on students' mental health and social well-being. And honestly, I really started to reflect and think to myself, what is my role in this? Having been a teacher for several years and an administrator for several years, knowing that this is going to represent a large challenge for our country, what is the role that I can play? And so that's partially what attracted me to Breakthrough. I've had the privilege of working with some stellar organizations, so Teach for America, KIP, Braven, both in my own way within these organizations. We were helping to build the next generation of leaders. And the idea of what we do at Breakthrough, our dual mission, first working with students from traditionally underrepresented backgrounds or historically underrepresented backgrounds, to help them see that college is possible for them and to help pave a path was one piece of excitement and attraction to Breakthrough. But it was also the second part of the mission, right? This notion of helping to develop the next generation of educational leaders at a time when our country needs not only teachers and educational leaders, but also diverse educational leaders entering into the workforce. And so the incredible work that Breakthrough was doing was of interest to me and really wanted to help contribute.
I know I've heard in your story that when you were at KIPP, Breakthrough was an incredible resource and asset to you. Tell me a little bit more about, like, in what way, because you talked a little bit about that second prong of our mission, and it always trips people up that we have two parts of our mission that we are wholeheartedly dedicated to fulfilling. Tell me how at KIPP Breakthrough was an asset to you.
Yeah, so while I was at KIPP, I was with KIPP for almost 11 years, and I had a number of roles while I was there, but one was overseeing our talent acquisition team and really thinking about what are the different avenues or pathways or entrance paths that we can have for amazing dynamic teachers. And frankly, our breakthrough teachers were some of our strongest teachers. And you all have heard, or Marion, you've heard the story of one of our KIPP New Jersey teachers who is now assistant superintendent for school district in the Boston area. You know, she credits her breakthrough experience. And this teacher was not only one of our strongest teachers, but she went on to become one of our principals. So our breakthrough folks did well within our organization. They came with an awareness, like a skill set, a with-itness that made it, I don't want to say easy, but made it possible for us to coach and work with them. So I was a fan of Breakthrough. I know we've been around for 42 years, but I was a fan of Breakthrough back in the early 2000s.
I will say, so I was less familiar with Breakthrough before I took on this role. And in my first couple of months in my role as executive director in Birmingham, one of the things I found was that our teaching fellows really are, I just want to say, I guess maybe low-hanging fruit when I think about what leadership sort of looks like, no matter where you plug them in, because they're thinking about these really hard questions from a very early time. So I know in a state like Alabama, where a relatively small state, right, in comparison to New York, where I was for 4 years, Alabama, relatively small, and so therefore one person has a lot of impact. And so I know in Birmingham, one of the things we focus on is how do we get our teaching fellows to not only come to Birmingham, so we're attracting young people from across the country to come to Birmingham. I have no doubt that when they come, they can fall in love with Birmingham, but it's also how do we get them to stay, whether it's in Birmingham or the state of Alabama, because they're going to have such a huge impact, knowing that these are 19, 20-year-olds coming, and that's where they're starting off having the conversation, thinking about inequities at multiple levels, to know that they're going to go into multiple paths, whether that's in the classroom or in school districts, whether that's in policy or in medicine, and in the back of their mind, they've got that thought process. I think it's pretty powerful. So to know that that's been something you've seen in other avenues of what you've been doing, I think it's a testament to what Breakthrough is able to do, right? So I guess speaking about that, because you talked a little bit. Oh, I feel like you're about to say something.
Oh, no. I think the only thing I would add is that I do think that the work we do on recruitment and selection of our fellows is pretty strong, in the sense that we are focused on folks who are mission aligned, really focused on the issues facing educational equity. And though some of our teaching fellows who come on board had no initial designs of becoming a teacher,
right.
This early exposure for many of them helps them understand the broader issues that are facing the inequities within education. So they become teachers, they become leaders within the education space, and they're bringing their early experience, their college experience from Breakthrough with them throughout their career. I was just talking to someone at the Department of Labor who was a 2012 teaching fellow with our Miami affiliate, and that experience shapes how he's thinking about some pre-apprenticeship programs through the Department of Education. So it is a transformational experience, not only for students, but also for teaching fellows and what they go on to do, whether it's in the classroom doing amazing things or shaping and shifting policy for school districts, or in some cases, or in the example that I shared, for the country.
And I think that this actually is a perfect segue into like this next sort of idea. We know that we're in this weird time, right? So March 2020, the world became very different almost overnight. And we will be dealing with the ramifications of that for a very long time. We know that especially in this country, we've seen we've had a lot of disparities. It's not a secret that we've had disparities in this country, inequities that have abounded. And when the pandemic hit, that those disparities were greatly exacerbated. And what is it? There's this quote that I hear a lot of, just like everybody was in the same storm, but maybe in different boats. And I think about that when I think about especially the populations of students that we serve across the country. So talk to me a little bit more about just like what you saw, what you're seeing. I know you mentioned a little bit earlier that you really sat down and thought, and that's how you kind of got to breakthrough about just your role in all of this.
Yeah. I mean, so I think at this point, a lot of folks know that the impact of the pandemic on learning loss has been great. So the New York Times has, done their reporting, and I think that they've done pretty good, extensive reporting around the impact of the pandemic on education and on learning loss. And so I think, when we really get down to it, yes, the pandemic did affect all of us in various ways, but to your point, we're all in the same storm, but in different boats. We know that the research shows us, or the results show, that it was students of color economic status were disproportionately impacted by the pandemic. And I think for us and the work that we do, this makes it even more important, right? So, Marian, this work has always been important, that, but it makes it even more so at this point, given the fact that 90% of our students identify as students of color. And just knowing how many of them have been disproportionately impacted, their school systems, et cetera. It's a moment for us to really step up to the plate and bring our tested model to the fore and continue to work with our students to help close some of these gaps.
And not just on the student side, right? So like, I think what's happening in my brain right now are all the stats that are coming up of every article that I've ever read in the last 2.5 years since March 2020. I think one of the pieces that keeps popping up is how this affects not just student outcomes, but like how this is affecting teachers and education in general, education at large. Students are going to obviously be the direct, most directly hit. But what we're also seeing is a shift in what's happened with teacher shortages. The turnover for teachers is at an all-time high. And that's one of the things that I think that keeps me up at night, of just, we know that kids are going to still be in school for a very long time, and we don't have another model for how to teach students, and we know that education is important.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, everything you said is true. Let's take a moment quickly and talk about our students. So we know that, it's affected their learning, and, erased, according to the Times, 2 decades worth of progress that we've made in public education. So we want to be honest about the fact that it has had an adverse effect on our students from a learning side.
And I think I've even seen something along the lines of 3 years of, like, students have aged, as teenagers rather, across the world, have aged 3 years, and not because they're more mature, right? That would be a positive aging, but because it's like ACE aging, right? Adverse childhood effects, events taking place, and that's never a positive, right?
And that's exactly it, right? So there's the academic side, but then there's the social emotional side of it too, right? So the pandemic put our kids in positions where they've had to confront, to your point exactly, mental health challenges at an earlier age. And so I'm excited to share a little bit more later about the work that we're doing at Breakthrough to address the social emotional side of our program and of our work. But I do want to touch on the other part of your question, which are our teachers. So let's be honest, according to Education Weekly, there are 36,000 teacher vacancies in our country right now. If we look at it, it disproportionately affects low income and urban areas.
Yep.
And this is where like the larger equity issue comes into play. There is a call to action that, I believe that Breakthrough and some of our partners are standing up in this moment and really working in partnership to determine what a solution can be so that we don't continue to see this gap that was already widened. So,
right.
But now it's widening further, and now is the time that we must take action to close it.
And so I think exactly what you're mentioning is what we're seeing in the state of Alabama as well. I think when they did surveyed teachers last year, 50% of teachers were slated to leave the classroom. And not just teachers, but we're also thinking about administrators, people who are like 50% is a big number, whether they're retiring, whether they're, and they're not choosing to necessarily go in. I will say, well, one of the things that's been heartening, that's been positive, is even we're in the process of recruitment, as you know, for teaching fellows across the country right now. There's a thirst for college students wanting to support and get in the leagues, and so that's been a nice little positive. But there is still this scary part of what is happening to teachers. We know that classroom sizes are getting a little bit bigger, and kids are struggling a little bit more with academics because of the short of what's taking place. And while Alabama has been, I think, the #1 state when it comes to pandemic recovery, that's not really saying all that much. And when we know that there was already so much taking place that was holding students back. And so we know that there's a lot of work to be done, and we want to make sure that we are able to support. So I guess with that lines right up with my next question of just how is Breakthrough sort of meeting this moment right now when it comes to the recovery?
Yeah, I mean, I think part of it has to do with what has led to our success thus far, which is the out of school time. So the expanded learning time for students throughout the summer programming and our year-round programming is going to play a large role in helping to address this particular issue. So Marion, as well as I do, but our kids are getting an extra 80 hours of learning over the summer, which is almost equivalent to adding 10% to their school year.
Yep.
And so this additional learning time is going to help with some of these gaps that we're seeing on the academic side for our students. One data point that we have is that in reading, at least, we saw 3.5 months of growth in our students over the summer. So we know that it is about continuing to do what we do on the academic side with revisions and updates that we're in the process of making to continue to meet this moment. But I would definitely say the extended learning time for our kids is a critical piece and frankly part of the magic of Breakthrough. I also think
the only thing I was going to add to that, for anyone who might not know, like I know that this was new information to me when I first got into this role. On average, a kid on average loses about 2 months of academic gains during the summer, when they don't have supports. And if you're coming from a low income environment, the average is about 3 months of learning loss. So when you mention the point of 3.5 months of gains, that's on top of what was already supposed to be lost, right? So that's a huge amount of gains just taking place at that point.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I think, there's the academic side. I'm also honestly really inspired and motivated by our social emotional learning framework. So
that's my favorite part too. Yeah.
And rolling out, which is called our Human First framework. We have some incredible folks on the team working on it. A woman named Jenny helped design it. And rolling it out within our affiliates. But I think that that's going to be a major lever for us to support our teaching fellows who are ultimately supporting our students in navigating the complex times that we're currently in. So I think it's this academic side, but then it's also about the core human being, the kid that is in front of the teaching fellow. I think the other thing that we're doing right now to meet this moment is continuing to recruit incredibly motivated, mission-aligned teaching fellows from over 200 colleges across this country to commit to a 9-week for them, 6 weeks for our student, but a 9-week long commitment to help really support our students with their acceleration or any learning loss that they may have. And again, in this moment, just knowing that 76% of our teaching fellows go into education is also another way to meet this moment. And I would say us at the national office, we are thinking through how can we continue to support pathways into education. The final thing I'll just say is partnerships. We are partnering with other organizations to lock arms to help solve this particular challenge. So, we work with an organization called National Summer Learning Alliance, NSLA. We work with them. We're also in the process of having conversations with Teach for America and how we can partner too on the teacher side as well. So we're looking strategically to partner with other organizations who may not necessarily do exactly what we do, but when you place them all together, they help. So it just reminds me of what, I work for Braven.
Right.
At Braven, where I worked, I led our New Jersey region. We partnered with Rutgers Newark, and the chancellor of Rutgers Newark is an amazing woman. Her name is Nancy Cantor. And, when she talked about why she partners with organizations like Braven and other organizations, it's because you're thinking about creating stackable solutions to solve a larger issue, right? And so when I think about our partnerships, it is about partnering with others to create stackable solutions, recognizing like we don't have to be the expert on everything and vice versa. And how might we work with others to solve this larger issue?
I love that analogy. I think the way that I think about it in my head, and might be that I'm switching over to stackable solutions, is like building a bench. So just building a bench of leaders so that there's always people in the room. There's always people, different types of leaders coming from all over who are playing on the court at the same time and helping support whatever the solution might be. I think one of the things you mentioned before, just as we're thinking about our teaching fellows, so many of them do go into the education spaces. And I think that the other big piece, like so many of them identify as people of color. And we know that the research tells us that especially students of color have better outcomes when they've got people that look like them reflected in front of them in the classroom. And so I think that's also something special. I think that's really close to my heart at Breakthrough, just the fact that there is an emphasis not just on getting mission-aligned people into the classroom, but mission-aligned people who a lot of times come from the same communities that our kids are coming from. I think that's a huge win for our kids to just see and understand what that means.
Let me just expand on that a little bit. So we have 76% of our teaching fellows identify as students of color or college students of color, and then 49% or 46% are first in their families to go to college. So that's such an incredible opportunity for them to connect with our students. But then if they decide to go in the classroom or when they go into education, it's the same. And then I think to what you said about students of color having teachers of color and the impact that has, and that is unequivocally true. And also the beautiful part about it is all students do well too when have a teacher of color. So I think that there's real opportunity here for us.
And I think that's like, I wanted to say a little bit on this topic, was just like what we do with the teacher fellowship piece. And Breakthrough, I think one of its claims, the huge claims to fame, other than what we do with our kids, is just it's the largest pre-professional training program in the country. So how do we utilize this as an opportunity to create new pathways for just the next generation of leaders, really?
Yeah, I mean, so we're in a process right now of really building out our strategic plan for the next 3 years, where we have to, I believe anyway, grow our programming, our work to serve more students over time. And by virtue of doing that, we will expand the number of teaching fellows that we're bringing into the fold, and then ultimately into the teacher pipeline world. So it'd be great, knowing right now that we're working with 1,000 students, or teaching fellows, I should say, each summer. Be great to think about, what would it look like if we doubled that? What would it look like if we tripled
Love
that?
that. Love that.
So I can't commit to anything at this point, but these are the big questions that I'm asking myself. These are the big questions that our team is asking. What is it? What would it look like? What would it look like if we expanded our impact over time? And so we're currently thinking that through.
And I mean, first of all, bold, and I love bold. I love a bold vision and just a bold piece. And I think the answer, if I may be so direct, is what it looks like is everybody wins. Because we also know, and I'm going offline a little bit here, but we also know that being a teacher, having the experience of a teacher, lends itself to so many other careers as well, right? So whether you're in the classroom, outside the classroom, there's just so much that you're getting from being a teacher, that can be so productive for any field you choose to go into. So the answer to your question is, like, it looks great for everybody, honestly, but I might be biased personally, just in this role, right?
No, I share. Well, I'm glad to hear your point about that. And I 1000% agree with you going offline a little bit about the skills that you develop as a teacher. I mean, I can't, I mean, I don't know of many professions that allow you to develop such executive level skills at such a early stage of your career. So you have, and I get a little bit on my soapbox about this, but when you're talking about a teacher, their lesson planning, their unit planning, that is called strategic planning, right?
Right.
They're breaking down content. They are managing their classrooms. They're managing diverse sets of stakeholders, whether it's their grade level chair, department chair, vice principal, principal, families, etc. We call that relationship building and coalition building. And so the list goes on and on about
project management, time management, collaboration. There's just so much there that everybody gains. I think the powerful piece about our teaching fellowship is, whether or not you choose to go into the classroom, you are winning with your next career move regardless, right? There's no way you cannot walk into your next career without having so much in your backpack, so much in your toolbox to use. And so it has been a phenomenal, just these past 4.5 years in this role has been a nice way to just a reminder. I spent a long time in the classroom, 3 years in rural Alabama and 4 years in New York City. And I can tell you, teaching regardless would love to hear a little bit more about,
the process of looking at, and you're right, our folks in Central Texas are working with universities to provide credit for their experience as a teaching fellow. And so we're looking at similar types of partnerships across the country, across from the schools from which we recruit. To what extent are students who participate in our breakthrough programming over the summer as teaching fellows, how might they earn credit toward their graduation as well? How might they be able to leverage this for practicum experience, et cetera? And so we do want to look at how we're partnering with colleges and universities, and broadly, and then of course schools of education, et cetera. And then other organizations are eager to look to us to figure out how we might be able to create pathways for our teaching fellows into their organizations. And so
which isn't always easy. It's not always easy to do, right.
It's not. There's so much. I believe, just from my experience on the hiring side, at the systems level or administrative level, I would love for us to be at a place help open doors and opportunities for them as well.
And I think one of the most one of the easier partners we've definitely had in Alabama has been with working with Teach for America Alabama. We've been lucky that they have been a strong partner with us, and that like building leaders some of them who stay in the classroom and some of them who are more focused on systems level change outside the classroom. And that's so aligned to what it is that we're doing, right? We want to get as many of our folks into the classroom. And if you're choosing to not go into the classroom, it's because there are other places for us to focus on. I think to the point of the person you talked about in New Jersey, just making it stackable, making it so that there's almost like playing Tetris in your mind for focusing on one goal of just how do we eliminate inequities as much as possible. So I love the fact that we're getting to play around with that here in Alabama, but I know that there's a bunch of partnerships happening across the country with our 24 sites, and that's been really, really helpful. So I guess in thinking about, we talked a little bit about partnerships, we've talked a little bit about like the pandemic, we've talked a little bit about what the fellowships, what it is that we're providing with fellowships. The meat of this is really just thinking about like, what is this reimagined equitable education? Like what do we do moving forward? How do we emerge from this really, and I keep calling it a weird time because I honestly don't know if there's another way to describe what we all went through and how we're all just falling out to come back out. How do we emerge from that stronger than ever?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a couple of things, and I'm going to actually start on the teacher side. I feel like, once you're a teacher, you're always a teacher,
always a teacher,
or an advocate for a teacher, and so just when I think about what it means to reimagine public education, three things come to mind for me. The first is we recognize that education is typically a state-led entity, right? And so how do we ensure that our teachers have the ears of our governors, legislators, and policymakers in order so that their voices are heard as we are all thinking about what the next phase of education looks like?
In a lot of ways, elevating the profession in that sense.
Exactly.
Yeah.
They need a seat at the table, right? We need to listen and hear our teachers. In my home state of New Jersey, our governor has put together a task force, and a good portion of these members of the task force will be teachers, which I think is so critical and necessary for us right now. I think that the second thing is, it's what we've talked about somewhat earlier, which is we have to elevate the profession. Elevating the profession is critical because all of those skills that we just talked about a few minutes ago, those are high level skills. And we need to figure out how to help people understand that this role, this profession, is such a complex profession and therefore should be elevated. And then the third, and this sort of ties into the second point and loops back to the first, which is our state and local governments need to figure out, what does compensation look like for our teachers?
There's a good one.
It is a big one. I know it's a controversial one, and potentially even low-hanging fruit. And low-hanging fruit meaning as an issue to address, right? Because our teachers just need to be paid or compensated in the ways in which their work requires it. So when I think about reimagining it, education, at least on the teacher side, it's really about figuring out how we are hearing more from our teachers. How are we ensuring that our teachers their profession is elevated and that we're compensating them adequately? And then on the student side, yes, as it relates to academics, I have read some articles, some research that has talked about personalized learning by groups of students. It's an opportunity for teachers to build deeper relationships with students and really help with remediation. I know you've been in education for a while. I have as well. I have heard of aspects of personalized learning, but perhaps that's something that we need to examine a little bit more. And then the second piece is just what does it take, or what do we need to do to ensure that more of our schools have access to mental health counselors?
I mean, I appreciate,
or communities to bring that in too. So yeah.
And what I appreciate about a lot of what you're saying is that a lot of these I think you're reiterating points that we know are just like no-brainers, right? Like pay teachers more. But they're also just like accessible. I'm just thinking about just, it doesn't take much to open up a door for a teacher to be a part of a conversation that can influence what's happening at a district or a community or state level, right? I think the other piece is like I'm appreciating bringing in that the mental health piece, and that knowing that it's not just like a school-based piece, but just as a community, I'm sorry, as a country, we haven't always done well with prioritizing that. And I think you mentioned a little bit earlier, and I'd love to hear a little bit more about this part, just as we're thinking about reimagining equitable education, how we center just a people first mentality, knowing that yes, the academics are something to look at. Yes, the metrics are so important. And also maybe what's more important, and I think that's what Breakthrough's been doing so well for so long, is like we actually just focus on people first, and everything else is a byproduct of that success.
Yeah. And I don't know that I have that much to add to
Yeah.
what you just said, other than, I think that's part of the reason why we think of our social emotional learning framework as a human first framework, right?
Mhm.
It is centering the humanity in of our students in our work. And so I think the extent to which we can continue to do that within our school systems, I think that will help. I mean, we just have to acknowledge that there are aspects of what we did before that worked,
Right.
but may not work now, right? And we have to figure out what worked before that can work now, what worked before that won't work now. That is the moment we're in right now. It's not as though we are picking up from, we took a 2.5, depending on where you live, 2.5, maybe 3 year pause on certain things, and
Mhm.
now we pick back up. Things dramatically shifted during the
Mhm.
2.5, 3 years of the pandemic. So it's not about picking up from where we left off.
That's a really great point. I think the other piece I'm thinking about is just I think sometimes the way that people think about it is an either or conversation as opposed to a both and. And so like just pushing on the fact that we can not only focus on ensuring we're focusing on people. Like I think with Breakthrough, we do really well with small classroom sizes. I think to even personalize education that you mentioned earlier, it's even if it's not like one-on-one, it is small classrooms, right? So that helps a lot with the amount of growth that we see. It's a tremendous amount of growth that we see even during a short summer. But so not only can we focus on like high expectations when it comes to academics, that will also garner I'm sorry, high expectations on the people focused aspect, that will also garner a whole bunch of high outcomes for students, high outcomes for families, high outcomes for communities. There's so much that comes from just ensuring that like I guess the thing I'm coming back to is the first phrase I heard at Breakthrough was high expectations, high support.
Oh,
Um,
yes.
and that I think is the piece of wherever it's coming from. This is where we lift that and everybody wins. And so I'm loving the fact that Breakthrough Collaboratives is really, I think, focusing on that. I think especially with the amount of college kids who are at the 24 sites going to be taking that in every single summer and then going out into their own worlds to pepper that same idea. Like, we matter, and we mattering means that we can actually get a lot more accomplished in a shorter amount of time.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I'm curious, you've touched on this a little bit, but for you, what does reimagine education look like in Alabama?
Yeah, I think it's a lot of what you said in the sense of if we can figure out how to respect the people doing the work on the ground, it goes really far in ensuring that students feel safe and supported in the classrooms. So how do we take care of our teachers? I think a lot of it is we are putting teachers at the table. We are having them as part of the conversation. A lot of it is also just like listening to students. And I think that that's sometimes a little bit harder in a state like Alabama. Just think Southern culture doesn't always bode to necessarily listening to kids. But it is really important. And I think we are working with a generation that is, I think, advocacy is in their blood, which is great because, that's what we do at Breakthrough. We help kids sort of figure out what is it I'm trying to say and how is it that I'm ensuring that you understand what I'm trying to say, adult. But I think listening to kids goes really far. I think to your point earlier where you mentioned we have to sort of figure out what is going to keep what worked before versus what's not going to work now, even if it was successful before. What we found at Breakthrough Birmingham, even in the way that we run some of our programming, last summer, it was a great summer and there were kinks. And it was our teaching fellows specifically who identified like, hey, we struggled with this, and so going forward we'd like to see this, and for us to come together to say, all right, teaching fellows, you have an opinion, let's put that to work, let's figure out so that the next person, and that's really I think what great community work is. I think it's what great um inequity finding solution is. It's figuring out like what are the kinks. We're not human, there's always going to be kinks, and then how do we leverage our assets, our people, our community. And I think that is the piece we have so much in our community. Breakthrough functions on just community, right? How is it that we are bringing kids and teach and college kids and middle school kids and high school kids into a conversation about their own futures? And I think that's true of the state of Alabama. I think that's not different anywhere else, thankfully, and
Yeah.
also sadly, right? So
Yeah.
for me, it's I'm lucky to be in a state once again where one person can have a huge difference. And I think that we are betting a lot on our students and our teaching fellows to be a part of that change making.
Mhm.
We
Mhm.
love that. Love that. Well, I know that we're about to wrap up with our time. I know, but any last parting thought? I think I'm like thinking about a couple of things, but any last thing that comes to mind that is just like on your mind right now, or as they say in the, on your heart right now?
My heart right now. Yeah, I mean, I think it's what I said just a few moments ago of just for me, part of reimagining equitable education is really looking at the moment that we're in right now
Mhm.
and recognizing it's almost like the keep, start, stop list. Like, what are
Mhm.
the things that we're going to keep that can meet this moment? What are the things that we need to stop doing? And then what are the things that we need to start doing? And just recognizing that this moment is unlike any other moment that we've really experienced, at least in my lifetime, in your lifetime. And so really wanting to make sure that we're acknowledging that. The final thing I'll just say is that the work that happens in our 24 sites across the country is really powerful.
Mhm.
Um, yes, we have the outcomes that reflect the impact of the program. But when I'm traveling and spending time with our sites and talking with students, the qualitative data that I'm getting from students, from their families, that Breakthrough is having on them is just inspiring. So I think it's more perhaps to an internal audience, but that being the Breakthrough, our 24 sites just continue to do the amazing work that you all are doing. And, we're here to continue to work in partnership with you to accomplish that.
Well, I'm extremely grateful that we could be a part of a network that is being so intentional and thoughtful about it. And I think also really thinking about what it looks like to partner with people who are also thinking about those same sorts of questions, because it's going to take more than one of us. It's going to take more than 10 of us to come together and sort of figure out what it means to answer this really, really hard question. Really grateful that we got to talk today, Vince. I think this has been a good use of time, good chunk of time, and really getting my brain thinking about planning for the next couple of years, honestly, for what is possible. And I'm walking away with the word that's coming to mind is it's hope grounded in reality of just what is possible in this country. It's not anything, it's not rocket science. Maybe it is rocket science to some degree, but it's not rocket science. It's a reminder of what is it that Muhammad Ali said? It's impossible until you do it, right? And so this is that part there for me, just like this conversation has been a refresher in that sentence.
Same here. Really appreciate it, Marianne. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And for those tuning in, if you know of any amazing college students who are interested in this sort of work, if you personally know them or you know of how to connect with them, our QR code should be flashing across your screen right now. We are in the process of recruiting great potential leaders across the country who are looking to be a part of this very conversation. So thank you so much for your time. Thank you for joining Vince and I in this incredible conversation, and have a phenomenal rest of your day.
Yes, thank you so much, Marion, for your time. And just thank you to our partners, many of whom we've mentioned, but some we haven't. We really appreciate it. To our ongoing supporters, whether our donors or other advocates of our work, we really appreciate your support and thank you for your time. Take care, everyone.
All right, y'all.